My name is Manuel. I'm 76 years old and my body is already weary with age. My hands bear the marks of hard work, and my heart bears the scars of a lifetime of sacrifice. I thought that, upon reaching this age, I would find rest in the arms of my family, perhaps a quiet chair by the fire surrounded by those I helped raise. But the reality was quite different. On an afternoon when everything seemed ordinary, I sat in my old rocking chair, the same one where I watched my children take their first steps, the same one where I told stories to my grandchildren, the same one where I cried alone when I lost my wife. That chair wasn't just an object. It was part of me. It was my refuge, my silent altar. But that day, the heavy footsteps and harsh voices of those I once called my children broke the silence. They entered the room with grim expressions as if my presence were an affront. And before I had time to react, rough hands grabbed me by the arms. I was forcibly yanked from the chair that had been my seat for decades. My frail legs wobbled, my body nearly falling. And as I tried to understand what was happening, I heard the scream that shattered my heart. "An old man like you doesn't deserve to be here." The entire room seemed to fall silent, but inside me, a scream echoed. It wasn't just the humiliation of being removed from a chair, it was what it meant. I was no longer part of the house, no longer part of the family. I was an intruder, a nuisance, a worthless old man. My eyes welled up, not from fear, but from pain, because I realized that all the years of sweat, all the sleepless nights, all the sacrificed dreams meant nothing to them anymore. At that moment, I thought my story would end there, crushed by contempt, but little did they know that the end they tried to impose on me would only be the beginning of something much greater. Before I was pulled out of my own chair and told I didn't deserve to be there, I was so much more than the useless old man they tried to make me out to be. I was born in the backlands where the land was dry and life was hard. As a boy, I learned to work with a hoe, with the sun beating down on my skin and hunger gnawing at my stomach. While others played, I was already working. Not because I wanted to, but because life gave me no other choice. I married Rosa, the love of my life, young. She had eyes that lit up even the darkest days. Together, we dreamed of building something our children could call their future. I made a promise to her on our wedding day. As long as I breathe, you and our children will never know abandonment. And so it went. I worked at everything I could find: bricklayer, porter, security guard, planter. I've spent entire nights guarding cold warehouses. I've carried sacks of flour until my back screamed. I've walked miles on foot just to make sure I got paid. Often the money was so little it barely covered the basics. But I never let food go missing on the table. If I didn't eat, too bad. But they didn't. The children came, one after the other. I welcomed them with tears of joy, even though I knew each new mouth was another weight on my weary shoulders. But I didn't care. I remember each of them sleeping in my lap, the nights Rosa and I exchanged weary but loving glances. Certain it was worth it. The house I built with my own hands had holes in the roof, but it was our home. With each brick laid, I said to myself, it's for them. It's by them. I spent decades believing that respect was an inheritance a father earned through hard work and sacrifice. That when my legs gave out and my hands lost their strength, I would find in them the support I always offered. But life, cruel in its irony, showed me otherwise. Just when my strength began to fail, they took away not only my place of honor, but even the dignity of sitting peacefully in my own chair. And it was at that point that I realized, nothing hurts more than being treated like a stranger in the house you built yourself. The signs began small, almost imperceptible, like discreet cracks in an ancient wall. I wanted to believe they were just oversights, passing mood swings, but deep down I knew something was changing in the way they viewed me. I remember one night at dinner, we were all gathered at the table. I told one of my old stories, from the time I worked as a bricklayer, carrying blocks under the blazing sun. As I spoke, one of my sons laughed and interrupted. "Dad, all you ever talk about is work. These stories are getting old. No one can stand them anymore." Everyone laughed along. I remained silent. I continued chewing slowly, letting the taste of the food fade away in my mouth. Outwardly, I forced a smile, but inside, a part of me began to break. Once again, I stumbled as I climbed the porch steps. My legs were no longer steady, and I had to hold on to the wall. Before anyone could come to help me, I heard a cold voice. "Look, soon we'll have to carry him everywhere." It was a joke to them, but to me it was a warning. They no longer saw me as a father, but as a burden. Even my chair, my only resting place, became the target of comments. One afternoon, as I settled into it after a long day, I heard my daughter-in-law whispering to her daughter, "That old man won't leave. He seems to think the room is his." That went through me like a knife. Did it look like the room was his? I was the one who built that room, who built every wall, who sweated and bled for that house to exist. The looks in my eyes also changed. Before, there was affection and respect. Now, there was only impatience. When I took a long time to get up from the table, when I forgot something, when I asked for help with something simple, every small gesture was met with sighs and rolled eyes, as if I were a nuisance to be tolerated. I began to withdraw. I spoke less, took up less space, and hid in corners. But even so, it felt like my presence weighed heavily. And it was like that, with small barbs and everyday slights, that they prepared the ground for the day when they would forcibly pull me from my own chair, shouting that I didn't deserve to be there. Over time, what had once been a whisper became a loose word, thrown around without any embarrassment. The respect I believed to be unbreakable began to crumble before my eyes, and I felt with each passing day that I was no longer part of the family but simply a burden. One night, I remember clearly, everyone was in the living room talking about a special dinner. I sat there in silence, waiting to be included. When I finally opened my mouth to make a suggestion, one of the daughters-in-law cut me off curtly. "You don't need to worry, sir. These things are no longer of your time." The sentence fell like a stone. I was speechless, staring at my own hands, unsure of what to say. It wasn't just exclusion. It was the message that I no longer had a place or a voice. Then there was the grocery store incident. I accompanied Miguel to help him carry some bags. When some acquaintances saw us together, they greeted him. Miguel responded with a smile. But when they noticed me, he simply said in a low voice, "That's my father. He doesn't do much anymore, but he wanted to come." It was said as if apologizing for the company. I felt small, invisible. Even my grandchildren, not understanding the weight of what they were saying, began to attack me. One time, one of them saw me trying to lift a light box and said, laughing, "Grandpa can't handle anything, he's weak." Everyone laughed along. I smiled too, so as not to spoil the joke, but inside me, the laughter was a painful echo. The chair, my faithful companion, became a symbol of what they wanted to take from me. Every time I sat in it, I saw exchanged glances and impatient sighs, as if that piece of wood and fabric were more valuable than my own presence. More and more, I felt like I was being pushed out, not just from the chair, not just from the room, but from my family, from my home, from my life. And it was in this escalation of contempt, in these small daily stabs, that I realized they were preparing to tear me out of even the last space I had left. The small gestures of contempt turned into open aggression, no longer hidden behind laughter or whispers. They spoke their minds, without any fear of hurting me. One night at dinner, I asked to speak to share a memory of Rosa, my late wife, their mother. I simply wanted to share a beautiful moment, to bring a bit of her memory to the table. But before I could finish, Miguel interrupted impatiently. "Dad, no one wants to hear those sad stories. You only know how to talk about the past." The sentence came like a slap. I fell silent, swallowed, and finished my meal in silence. As I chewed, I realized my eyes were burning, but I didn't allow the tears to fall before them. The other day, I slipped while sweeping the porch. I fell to my knees and needed help to get up. I expected them to rush to me, but what I heard was a harsh comment. "Why do you insist on doing what you can't? It only gets in the way." No arm reached out. I stood up alone, leaning against the wall, feeling more pain in my heart than in my body. The chair, my refuge, became a point of contention. One afternoon, as I settled into it to rest, one of my daughters-in-law spoke loudly without any attempt to hide it. "This old man thinks the house is his. He won't leave that place." The phrase echoed around the room, and no one disputed it. It was as if everyone already shared the same idea. I was an intruder, taking up space. And so little by little I realized they no longer wanted to just silence me, but to expel me. Not just from the room, but from the community itself. It was as if my presence was too uncomfortable, as if they were waiting for the right moment to forcibly remove me. And that moment, I knew, would come. The day arrived, without warning. An ordinary afternoon, with a cloudy sky and a cold wind blowing through the cracks in the window. I sat in my old rocking chair, the one that held my memories. It was there that I watched my children take their first steps, where I told stories to my grandchildren, where I mourned Rosa's absence when she left. That chair wasn't just wood and fabric. It was my last shred of dignity. But suddenly I heard loud footsteps and raised voices. They entered the room in a group as if they had planned something. Before I could raise my head, firm hands grabbed my arms. I was pulled hard, my frail body unable to resist. My legs wobbled and I almost fell to the floor. And then came the scream, loud, cruel, as if it were a sentence. "An old man like you doesn't deserve to be here." Those words burned more than any physical exertion. It wasn't just about the chair, it was about me, about my existence. I was no longer seen as a father or a grandfather. To them, I didn't even deserve to be there, breathing the same air. I stood trembling, my eyes brimming with tears. I said nothing. I just looked around and saw cold faces, some even with a half smile of contempt. In that moment, I understood. All the love I'd given, all the sleepless nights, all the tears I'd shed, they were worthless to them. I walked silently to my room. I closed the door slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart sinking. I looked at my trembling hands and thought, has my whole life been in vain? That day, while the house continued with its conversations and laughter, I was alone in the dark, feeling that not only a chair had been taken from me, but my very dignity. And it was there, in solitude and pain, that a nearly extinguished flame within me began to stir. Because I realized that if I didn't fight to rescue my story, they would erase me forever. That night, after being dragged from my own chair and told I didn't deserve to be there, I sat on the edge of my bed for hours. My heart felt like it was made of stone. The silence of the house was broken only by distant laughter, laughter that hurt more than the scream that had wounded me. I looked around and saw the old wooden chest in the corner of the room. It was covered in dust, forgotten for years. I stood up slowly, my legs still shaking, and struggled to open its lid. The creak echoed like a call. Inside were pieces of my life no one else remembered. I found the yellowed photos of Rosa, smiling beside me when we were still young. Photos of her young children, running around the dirt yard. Each image reminded me that I wasn't an intruder, but the man who had shaped that family. I also sorted through old receipts, school registration, doctor's appointments, even the note from when I bought materials to build my own house. I remembered every detail, the sun burning my skin, the open calluses on my hands, the weight of the bricks I carried alone. At the bottom of the trunk, I found a black-covered notebook. It was worn, the pages stained with age. Years ago, I had written memoirs and small notes about my life in it. I ran my fingers over the cover and decided it was time to write again. I picked up a pen and began recording not just memories, but evidence. I wrote about sleepless nights nursing fevers, about days I shared my plate so they wouldn't go hungry, about the silent sacrifices that kept everyone going. Each word was like a brick rebuilding my dignity. I organized everything in a blue folder Rosa had given me a while back. I remember her saying, "Manuel, keep what's important here. One day they'll need to remember who you are." That night I understood what she meant. I closed the folder and hugged it to my chest. There were my evidence, my written voice, my entire life gathered together. And I promised myself, they can drag me out of my chair, but they will never drag me out of the truth. After organizing everything in the blue folder, I realized that papers and memories alone wouldn't be enough. I needed courage. The folder was proof of what I'd experienced, but if my voice failed, if I fell silent again, it would be just a pile of forgotten papers. So I began to rehearse. Every night, sitting on the edge of my bed or in front of the foggy bedroom mirror, I would open the black notebook and read aloud what I had written. At first, my voice was shaky, weak, almost a whisper, but as I repeated, it grew stronger, as if each word gave me back a piece of the dignity they had tried to strip away. You ripped me out of my chair, but you can't rip me out of the story I built. You screamed that I didn't deserve to be here, but without me, none of this would exist. I was the hands that held each brick, the shoulders that carried each weight, the sleepless nights that ensured each of your dawns. I repeated these phrases in front of the mirror until I felt that my eyes, tired and teary, were transmitting something beyond pain. They were transmitting firmness. But I also knew there was a greater enemy to overcome: resentment. Often in the middle of rehearsals, hatred would try to take over. I remembered the moment I was forcibly pulled away, and anger would rise like fire in my chest. But soon I would kneel, my knees aching on the cold floor, and pray quietly, "Lord, do not let my voice be one of vengeance. I want to speak truthfully, not hatefully." I also began writing short individual letters, one for each child. In them there were not only demands, but memories. To Miguel, I told him about the day I sold my bicycle to buy his uniform. To Clara, I wrote about the times I walked miles in the early morning to bring her the medicine she needed. For my grandchildren, I recorded family stories, so they would know that their grandfather was not the burden they described, but the foundation that held everything together. Every line written felt like I was honing my voice, preparing not just evidence, but testimony impossible to ignore. I closed the folder every night, hugged it to my chest, and thought, they pulled me out of my chair, but they won't pull me out of the truth. And I knew. The moment to bring them face to face with this truth was approaching. In the days that followed, I realized that my greatest struggle wasn't with my sons or daughters-in-law. It was with something much deeper, the silence I had allowed to grow within me. For years, I took every cutting word, every scornful look, every cruel joke in stride. I told myself, it's better not to respond, it's better not to create conflict, it's better to let it pass. But the truth is, every time I remained silent, they gained more space to erase me. My silence became fertile ground for humiliation. I needed to break through it. I needed to find the voice I'd let die over the years. But it wasn't easy. When I practiced in front of the mirror, I sometimes felt my whole body tremble. The fear of being interrupted, ignored, or ridiculed again gnawed at me. It was on one of those nights kneeling on the cold floor that I felt something different. As I prayed, words welled up inside me as if they weren't coming from myself. Your voice is not meant to hurt, Manuel. Your voice is meant to remind. They need the truth even if it hurts. And you need it more than anyone. I got up with this certainty. My fight wasn't for revenge. My fight was to reclaim the memory of who I was and not allow myself to be buried alive. I wrote a phrase in the black notebook that I began to repeat every day. My silence will no longer be their weapon. My voice will be the memory they cannot erase. At that moment, I realized it wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about recording that I existed, that my life had value, that every sacrifice left marks that couldn't be spat out or ripped off a chair. With every word I rehearsed, every prayer I said, every memory I wrote, I grew stronger. Not physically. My body was already fragile, but spiritually and emotionally. And I understood. If life took away my strength, God was giving me courage. I no longer feared the confrontation. On the contrary, I began to look forward to it, because I knew that when the time came, I wouldn't speak merely as a wounded old man, but as a man who still had a voice. The right moment seemed distant, but I knew it would come. Life always finds a way to put everyone in front of the mirror. And this time, I wanted to be prepared. That's when I heard one morning that they were organizing a big family lunch for the weekend. Everyone would be there. Sons, daughters-in-law, grandchildren. A gathering that in other times would have filled my heart with joy, but now seemed like the perfect opportunity for the truth to come out. My heart raced. The memory of being dragged from my chair still burned inside me, but with it came a new strength. It was time. That night, I sat at my bedroom desk and opened the blue folder. I reviewed every document, every receipt, every yellowed photo. I reread the letters I'd written to each of my children, and I added one more, the most difficult, a letter without an addressee, written to everyone as a testament to my life. In it, there were not only memories, but confessions and declarations I'd never had the courage to say. Then I placed the black notebook on the table and wrote at the top of a blank page, "Sunday lunch. Today they will listen." I rehearsed in front of the mirror, imagining their silence, their possible laughter, even their contempt. But the more I rehearsed, the more I realized I didn't need to fear any of that. Because this time, it wasn't about acceptance. It was about truth. The night before, I barely slept. I spent hours in prayer, asking for strength not to let resentment overwhelm me. I didn't want my voice to be filled with hatred, but with firmness. Lord, if I fall, let it be on my feet. If my voice fails, let it be to tell the truth. On Sunday morning, I put on the best outfit I still owned, the same one Rosa loved to see me in. I ran my hand through my white hair, tucked the blue briefcase under my arm, and took a deep breath. As I walked to the room where everyone was already gathered, I heard the sound of mingled voices, laughter and silverware clanging against plates. But as I walked through the door, everything went silent, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't lower my head. The room was full. The smell of home-cooked food mingled with the buzz of conversation, the laughter of grandchildren running around. For a moment, I almost believed it was one of those old family lunches from years ago, when Rosa was still alive and everyone gathered together happily. But the difference was there. The looks. Some saw me as an intruder. Others simply pretended I wasn't there. I walked in slowly, my blue briefcase tucked under my arm. My footsteps echoed on the floor, and little by little the noise faded. One by one, they fell silent, until all that could be heard was the squeak of my worn shoes. I reached the head of the table, the place that had once been rightfully mine, and placed the briefcase on the white tablecloth. The sound of the metal latch unlocking echoed like thunder in the silent room. Everyone watched me, some curiously, others impatiently. I took a deep breath and said in a firm voice, "Before you eat, before you continue with your conversations, today you will listen to me." Miguel, the eldest son, frowned. One of the daughters-in-law rolled her eyes as if expecting one of my tired stories. But I didn't flinch. I kept my gaze steady. "You dragged me out of my chair. You screamed that I didn't deserve to be here. Well, today I'm going to show you why I'm here, and why I've always been here." I took the first photograph out of the folder. Rosa, young, with a baby in her arms, and me behind her, covered in dust, building the first wall of the house. I slowly placed it in the center of the table. This house exists because I built it with these hands. And every wrinkle, every scar, every callus is the mark of the one who supported you when you had nothing. I opened the black notebook, the sound of the pages turning echoing through the absolute silence. Today I will not be silent. Today you will hear the truth you always wanted to forget. I looked at each face before me. For the first time, I saw something different. Not just contempt, but the beginnings of discomfort. They hadn't expected me to have anything to say. I was ready. I opened the black notebook in front of them. The pages were already yellowed, some smudged from the tears I'd shed while writing. I held it tightly so my trembling hands wouldn't betray my emotions, took a deep breath, and began reading aloud. August 12th, 1979. I worked 20 hours in construction. I didn't have enough money for food, so I skipped dinner to buy the milk Miguel needed. I slept on the floor hungry but happy because my son didn't go to bed on an empty stomach. I looked up and stared at Miguel. He looked away, fiddling with his napkin like a guilty child. I continued, turning the page. March 3rd, 1984. Rosa cried because we didn't have any warm clothes for Anna. I sold my winter coat, the only one I had, to buy her a blanket. I spent the next few months shivering in the early mornings, but seeing my daughter warm was worth it all. I looked at Anna. Her eyes welled up and she covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. I closed the notebook for a moment and slapped my palm on the cover. "Do you remember this?" "No, of course not. Because you were too young to understand. But I remember. And every one of these pages is proof that I was never a burden." I opened another page and read, now with a choked but firm voice. May 15th, 1991. Rosa fell ill. I spent 3 days without sleep, caring for her and the children at the same time. I worked during the day and kept watch at night. My body begged for rest, but love wouldn't let me stop. I closed the notebook and looked at everyone. "You said I didn't deserve to be here, but it was precisely because I was here that you got to where you are." The room was silent. Even the children who didn't understand the gravity of it watched in silence, as if they realized that this moment was unlike any other. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt like it wasn't just an old man talking. It was a man giving back his own voice. I turned a few more pages of the notebook. The letters were already faded in places, but I remembered every word because they weren't just records. They were pieces of my soul. September 27th, 1995. Miguel dreamed of playing soccer for his school team, but the registration fee was too high. I worked as a porter at the market until late at night. When I received the money, instead of buying my back pain medication, I paid the registration fee. I saw his smile when he put on his uniform, and I thought, it was worth it. I looked up and stared at Miguel. His face was flushed, his eyes watery, but he remained silent, his lips pressed together as if fighting back tears. I turned another page. February 4th, 1999. Anna wanted to participate in a music competition. The prize was a scholarship, but she needed a simple dress to go on stage. I had no money. I spent nights sewing a dress from old fabric I found in storage. The dress wasn't new, but she walked on stage like a princess. When she sang, I cried in secret, afraid they would laugh at me. I looked at Anna. She was crying openly now, without hiding it, wiping her tears with her sleeve. I closed the notebook slowly and looked at everyone. You pulled me from my chair. You screamed that I didn't deserve to be here. But every chair in this house, every brick, every plate you put on the table only exists because I gave it my all. I then grabbed an envelope from the blue folder. I opened it and spread old receipts on the table. School registrations, doctor's appointments, medicine bills, electricity bills. Do you think these papers are just numbers? No. Each one is a night of pain, a day of sacrifice, a piece of my body that was lost so that you could grow. I looked around and completed. Tell me now, doesn't an old man like me deserve to be here? The room was plunged into silence. None of them dared answer me. I turned a few more pages of the black notebook. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the weight of memory. I took a deep breath and read, November 11th, 2002. The doctor said I needed urgent spinal surgery. The pain was already unbearable, but the operation was expensive. That same week, Miguel lost his job and Anna needed to pay college tuition. I had enough money saved for the surgery, but I gave it all to them. I spent the next few months in terrible pain, barely able to sleep, but happy to see them moving forward. The room fell silent. He could only hear the sound of Anna's sobs. She covered her face with her hands, while Miguel lowered his head, unable to look at me. I closed the notebook slowly and slammed my palm down on it. This is the difference between us. I endured the pain in my body to see you smile, and you ripped away even the right to sit in my chair, screaming that I didn't deserve to be here. I then pulled out a photograph I kept in my folder. It was of me, lying on a bed, wearing a makeshift brace on my back, still smiling, surrounded by my young children. I held the photo up in front of them. This image should be a reminder of gratitude, but you erased it. You chose to spit on me with cruel words. I looked into each of their eyes and no one could stand my gaze. How many times did my body ask for rest? And yet I continued. How many times did I give up on myself to give you what you needed? My voice rose, firm, without shouting. If an old man like me doesn't deserve to be here, then who does? Tears were already streaming down their faces. Even my confused grandchildren were quiet, feeling the weight of the moment. I hugged the blue folder to my chest and said, You tried to pull me out of my chair, but I didn't come here to reclaim a wooden place. I came to reclaim my voice, my story, and for the first time in a long time I realized they were listening. I closed the notebook and placed it on the table, letting the silence do its work. I stood slowly, bracing my trembling hands on the wooden tabletop, and walked, my gaze fixed on each face before me. There was no escape. I stopped in front of Miguel. Miguel, remember the day I took you to the hospital, carrying you in my arms, coughing nonstop? I walked for miles that night. My legs were burning, but I didn't stop. The doctor said that if it weren't for that, you might not be alive today. And now, the same man I carried was the one who yelled that I didn't deserve to be here. How can you live with that? He cried silently, biting his lips, unable to answer me. I turned to Anna. Anna, how many nights did I stay awake holding your hand when the fever wouldn't go down? How many times did I kneel down, asking God not to take you away from me? And it was you, my daughter, who turned your face away when they pulled me from my chair, as if I were invisible. She sobbed, tears streaming down her face, hiding her eyes behind her hands. I then approached my daughter-in-law, the one who so often murmured that I was just getting in the way. And you? How many times have I fixed the roof of this house so the rain wouldn't fall on your bed? How many times have I fixed the pipes, fixed the outlets, without ever asking for anything in return? And yet, you looked at me as if I were a nuisance. Tell me, who really got in the way here? Me, who gave my all? Or you, who treated me like nothing? She lowered her head, unable to look at me. Finally, I looked around the table at everyone. My voice, choked but firm, rose. You ripped me from my chair. But it wasn't just a place in the room. You ripped away my respect, my honor, the memory of everything I did. But here I am, before you, with every proof, every memory. And faced with this truth you can no longer hide. The entire room was in tears. Some looked at me, others didn't dare look up. Even the children, confused, were quiet, realizing the weight of that moment. I knew it. The wall they had built against me was beginning to crumble. I took a folded envelope from the blue folder which I had saved for that moment. It was the last letter I had written, not to Miguel, nor to Anna, nor to a specific daughter-in-law. It was for everyone. I lowered my eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "This letter is the truth you tried to bury. It's not a charge, it's not revenge. It's the memory that no one will erase." I opened the envelope slowly. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Children, one day you spat in my face, pulled me from my chair, and screamed that I didn't deserve to be here. But before that, I had already spent sleepless nights caring for you, walked miles in pain, shared the last piece of bread so you wouldn't go hungry. If one day you believe I'm worthless, remember, every life you have was sustained by the sacrifice I carried in my body and in my heart. I looked up and tears were streaming down faces around the table. I continued, I don't regret what I did. Every pain was love, every callous was care, every tear was surrender. You may have taken away my chair, but you can never take away the truth of my life. I wasn't a hindrance. I was the foundation. I closed the letter slowly and placed it on the table, in the center, for everyone to see. You said I didn't deserve to be here. Well, know this. Without me, you wouldn't be here. I raised the blue folder to my chest and finished in a firm voice. You pulled me out of my chair, but you won't pull me out of history. The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to respond. Even my grandchildren, who barely understood, stood motionless, staring at the adults in tears. I left the letter on the table like an open wound and turned. I walked toward the door slowly, unhurriedly. It wasn't an escape. It was dignity. They wanted me to be invisible, but that day, faced with the truth, I became impossible to ignore. At that moment, I knew. My fight didn't end there. Something bigger was yet to come. I closed the bedroom door behind me and let my tired back lean against the wood. Silence enveloped me again, but this time it was different. It was no longer the heavy silence of humiliation, but the silence after a scream had finally been heard. I sat on the edge of the bed, the blue folder still clutched to my chest. I ran my hand through the pages of the black notebook, the letters, the old photos. Everything they'd tried to erase had now been laid bare before their eyes. I'd shown them the truth, and no one could deny it. But even so, there was still an emptiness inside me. The pain of their words, the moment they pulled me from the chair, the cruel scream telling me I didn't deserve to be there. It all still burned. I had won an external battle, but the war inside my heart continued. I looked at the ceiling and whispered, Lord, I don't want resentment to consume me. I've already spoken. I've already shown. I've already exposed the truth. But what do I do now with this pain? I fell to my knees, the ground cold beneath my fragile bones. The tears began to fall, slowly at first, then heavily. I don't want to hate them. I don't want my last days to be remembered for hatred, but I can't do it alone. And it was there, in the silence of the room, that I felt something that human words cannot explain. There was no bright light, no audible voice. It was a gentle presence, as if someone had placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You never stopped being valuable to me. You were never worthless. I was with you through every night of pain, through every hidden tear. They may have forgotten, but I never did." My heart, so hardened by grief, began to soften. The anger dissolved. The resentment lost its strength, and in its place came a peace that hadn't come from within. I lifted my face, tears still falling, and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus, because when the world tore me from my chair, it was you who gave me a new place, that of a beloved son." That night I realized the true miracle wasn't in making my family bow to the truth. It was in allowing my heart to be healed by forgiveness. And for the first time in many years, I slept peacefully. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. My body still ached as always, but something inside me was different. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that crushing weight on my chest. The anger, the resentment, the desire for revenge. Everything seemed to have dissolved. In their place was a calm that didn't originate from me. I made my simple coffee, sat on the porch with the blue folder beside me, and watched the sky lighten. It was at that moment that I realized my victory hadn't been in presenting evidence, nor in making my children cry in the face of the truth. The true victory had happened within me, when I let Jesus enter the space previously occupied by hatred. Hours later, I heard timid footsteps approaching. It was Miguel. His eyes were still red from the night before. He stood still for a few seconds, not daring to speak, until he finally murmured, "Father, forgive me." I looked up and saw in him not the man who had pulled me from my chair, but the boy I had once carried in my arms to the hospital. And for the first time, I was able to smile without pain. "Miguel, I've already forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because I've also been forgiven by the Lord." Tears streamed from his eyes, and he knelt before me, weeping like a child. Shortly after, Anna joined him, followed by her daughters-in-law. They all came, one by one, their faces filled with shame. They apologized, but I knew the greatest testimony wasn't what I'd shown with documents or letters, but what God had done in my heart. I hugged each one, without hurt, without weight, just with love. "You tried to pull me from my chair, but God gave me a greater throne, that of a forgiving father, that of his beloved son." At that moment I understood. The true miracle wasn't making them recognize their faults. The true miracle was God transforming my hardened heart into one that loves and forgives. And as I hugged them, I noticed my grandchildren watching in silent awe. Perhaps they didn't understand the full depth of what was happening, but they were learning something no document could teach: the power of forgiveness. My story, which seemed to end in humiliation, had become a testimony, not because I had won, but because Jesus had won in me.